right, how's everyone doing? So I'm going to talk a little bit about exercise, nutrition, and some sleep. So as some of our previous presenters talked about, cardiovascular disease is a big issue, not only worldwide, but also especially within the fire department. So we'll be talking a little bit about planning your exercise, planning your nutrition, and getting sufficient sleep to mitigate that risk. To start, I would like participation from everyone in the room and anyone who's watching behind the camera. Go ahead and raise your hand if you engage in regular physical exercise. Everyone in the room, keep your hand raised. Now, keep your hand raised only if that exercise is planned. You track your volume and your intensity in some sort of journaling. Lots of hands went down. Cool, we got some left up. Keep your hand raised if you follow a healthy diet. Don't put your hand back up if you already dropped it, you're out. Okay, so keep your hand raised if you track macros, calories, you journal, you track your weight. Oh, Morgan's only left. And go ahead and put your hands down if you do not get enough sleep every night. You do not get a consistent 8 hours of sleep. Why am I the only one in the room with my hand up? That's a problem, okay? So we are going to talk about planning, periodization for firefighter health and performance. So our agenda today is the associated job risks, planning, exercise, periodization, nutrition, and sleep schedule. Cardiovascular disease accounts for 30% of on-duty fatalities among firefighters over the past 10 years. This is in the form of cardiac arrest, and that's going to arise from hypertension, atherosclerosis, and stress, both acute and chronic. Firefighters with sleep disorders are also 2.4 times more likely to have CVD, 1.9 times more likely to have diabetes, and 3 times more likely to have depression and anxiety, and we can assume how that might impact the previous. So, prevention. Prepare like an athlete, right? So our first presenter talked about these numbers in terms of athletes and related to that to firefighters. So this is gonna be important, right? So how do athletes prepare? Planned exercise, planned nutrition, and planned sleep. So how can we plan our exercise, right? You know, it's common in today's industry to pick the best exercises, pick the best type of training. But once we do that, how do we organize it, right? So in exercise science, we do that through what we call exercise periodization. This is what all athletes do, whether they realize it or not. Their strength coaches are periodizing their training in a way that they're going to peak their performance when they need to. They're going to recover appropriately, and it's going to match the way their nutrition is currently, depending on what season it is or what time in the week it is, when their next event is. So for an athlete, in season, they're gonna perform once a week, a couple times a week, if it's a higher frequency game day sport. You guys are going to be performing at a moment's notice, many times a week, especially if you work overtime, right? So we should periodize our training to perform well when you're supposed to, which, as we know, you may not know when that is. Fatigue management, we talked about inflammation and how that's going to affect your heart, cardiovascular markers, diabetes, and these things that we have established is a big problem in the fire department, okay? So you have a high stress job. If your training is high stress, as it should be, because we have to prepare to perform. We cannot constantly perform at a high level in training and then expect to perform at a high level on the job, right? So to avoid plateaus, to avoid injury, and to avoid overtraining, we need to start structuring our training in a manner to where we can perform well and not burn out. So how do we periodize? Macrocycles, mesocycles, and microcycles. And so that's going to be segmenting your year to months to weeks and into your daily cycles, using a principle of specificity to decide what forms of trainings do we need to perform our best and continue to build upon the skills that we need to perform on the job, right? And then how do we progress that? Objective and subjective feedback. What's objective feedback? Volume, intensity, and technique. These are the clear physical markers and the data markers that we can look at to say, training's been feeling bad, I feel fatigued, and these markers are higher than before. Let's change them. Subjective feedback, fatigue, motivation, and recovery. When you start feeling that fatigue, when you feel less motivated for your next workout, and when you're not recovering by your next shift or by your next workout, we know it's time to make a change. And consider your nutritional intake for each of these phases before engaging in your highest intensity block or low intensity block. We need to match the two. So types of fatigue, we have local. So that's gonna be muscle, connective tissue, this is your peripheral nervous system. This could be anything as simple as doing bicep curls. You're not gonna be able to do another set after sufficient recovery. If you had a leg day, you're probably not gonna have an effective leg day the day after leg day, right? Simple. Systemic fatigue. So, central nervous system, you're getting a big dump of hormones, you're getting a big dump of adrenaline when you do these big exercises like deadlift, like squat, and they're very heavy, high intensity, or high intensity interval training, or high intensity cardiovascular training, right? They talked about the inflammatory cytokines. This is a response that we get not only when we're sick, but also when we overtrain, right? This is why often when you have a week of hard training, you will often feel kind of sick, right? We have those inflammatory markers, which to a degree are very good because we need that for recovery. However, we need to mitigate that, right? We also have a degree of psychological fatigue that is also systemic. You know, we talked about not hitting numbers, you don't feel as good at the gym, you don't feel as good on the job, and that's gonna lead to a little bit of depression and stress, right? So avoid burnout with periodization and utilizing maintenance phases, 2 to 4 weeks post-cycle, make training fun, and drop your total volume and intensity to a reasonable amount to provide recovery. So, types of periodization. We have a linear. We increase variables week by week with scheduled deloads. This is what most people are going to gain a lot of benefit from, and from beginners to intermediates. Eventually, especially for athletes and for people like you, we're going to need to get into more advanced versions of periodization. We have block training. This is phasic training, with each block focusing on building upon a last skill and building upon the next, right? So this is usually in the goal of peaking for an event or performing well at the end of that phase. So we then have daily undulating and weekly undulating periodization. These are changes in volume, either any variable, volume or intensity, daily, to adjust for periods of time when you need to peel back on training. We could do weekly. We can have high intensity week, low intensity week, and alternate the two, right? So for you guys, how can this be applicable? So if you have 48 on, 96 off, right? You shouldn't make your highest intensity training days on your 48-hour shift, or right before, for that matter. So a possible solution would be making your harder training days, in the middle of your days off, tapering training, and then building back up when you get off shift again. This is harder for those of you who work overtime, but point being, you do need to start organizing your training in a manner to where you will not overtrain and not end up on the job without the energy to perform. So, moving into nutrition. I organize the importance of nutrition in a pyramid, right? At the bottom of your pyramid, we have calorie balance. So calorie balance is going to be king. This is going to be what stops you from gaining or losing weight. Then we have macros. Macros, we're going to adjust those different categories, and that will then set up the precedent for our next category, the micros. Micromolecules being vitamins, minerals, probiotics, prebiotics, these kinds of things. That typically falls in line after we get our macros together. However, if we do notice deficiencies there, we should address them. And at the top of our pyramid, we have what is probably most often overemphasized, but realistically the things of least importance is timing and supplementation, right? So, calorie balance. We do calculate with a simple formula. You can find this online. You don't really want to do the math yourself because it's a long, obnoxious formula, but it is the total daily energy expenditure. And with this, you should establish a plus or minus 500 calorie per day to either gain weight if that's your goal or lose weight if that's your goal. And fat loss will be productive to improving these cardiovascular markers. So once you have established your daily intake, I urge you to start tracking your weight. This is going to be the only way you're going to know the calorie balance that you established is doing what it's supposed to. All the formulas in the world aren't going to guess what each individual needs. So you use that formula to establish your baseline, and then we go ahead and track daily weight to monitor ourselves and then make our changes accordingly. So typical weight loss rates are 0.5 to 1% of body weight. Weight gain phases are similar. We do this because we don't want to be into excessive a deficit, especially for you firefighters, because you need your energy. And weight gains, we don't want to put on too much fat. So for those of you who have gotten into a bulk phase and you gained 20 pounds in a month, that's cool, but that's mostly fat. We do not gain enough muscle at quick enough rate to warrant that much weight gain. So then we get to the diet after the diet, right? You've lost all the fat that you need to. Now what? Well, we need to get into repair mode. We need to start adding calories back slowly but surely because we can't sit in a deficit forever, right? So the diet after the diet is one of the most important things in my opinion because we constantly hear about people losing weight, they're not able to keep it off, they rebound and they gain more weight than ever before, right? So manage it, and then once we get to the points where we have lost enough fat, let's slowly build up and progress in the same way we drop the fat off to enter this maintenance phase, right? So macronutrients. In general, our distribution range, 10 to 35% of protein is going to have the highest thermic effect of food. So I typically recommend a higher than usual protein intake, err on that side, because you will get more energy expended from food than any other macro. Carbs, 45 to 65%. You are going to be treating yourselves as athletes, so you do need to be getting your carbs in. Carbs are linked to high performance in athletes, pre-exercise, and we need to keep that up even during fat loss phases for you guys. Fat, 20 to 35%. This is the lowest thermic effect of food, so for my clients, I do drop fat as low as acceptable. What is acceptable? Minimum of 0.5 grams to 1 gram per kilo seems to be what is acceptable to maintain your hormone balance. Carbs, emphasize those near training, and protein, you should be getting somewhere between 1.6 to 2.4 grams per kilo as recommended for athletes. And again, we are considering you guys athletes. So, carbs and performance, 30 to 60 grams per hour of exercise. You'll take that shortly before or during prolonged exercise. This is especially important for moderate to high intensity exercise, which you guys are going to need to continue to establish to maintain your levels of fitness, and you're going to be using on the job. Fiber. This is going to be associated with a significant reduction in total and LDL cholesterol. So do not skip out on your fiber. Make sure you're getting enough of that. And so long as you're focusing on a well-rounded diet, you should be getting those through your carbohydrate intake. And it also has another high thermic effect of food compared to fats. All right, so fats, although they are going to be our lowest percentage, they do have a significant impact on CVD, right? So maintaining fewer than 7% of your calories from saturated fats and little to no trans fats. I'm gonna say that little to no trans fats. They are worth nothing. So keeping those things in that range, as well as keeping approximately 5 to 10% of your fats from polyunsaturated and 15 to 20% of your fats from monounsaturated, all have a positive impact on heart health, right? Omega-3 fatty acids, we get that from fish. I know a lot of people don't like fish. Either get over it or find a different food choice, which could be in the forms of chia seeds. That is a good plant option that I use for clients who do not want to eat the fish. Or you can use an omega-3 supplement, although not as good as food, it can get the job done. And although an adequate intake has not been established, most organizations do recommend between up to 250 and 500 milligrams of those omega-3s daily for heart health. Micronutrients, again, I wouldn't overstress this category so long as you're nailing your calories, hit your macros through a balanced diet. This should fall in line. And consuming antioxidant-rich foods like fruits and whole grains have been shown to have a huge impact on heart health. Supplements do not seem to have that same impact. So you can't just take a pill for everything, right? And that's usually because of the profile of each food, right? You're not only getting that specific molecule, you are getting a cascade of micromolecules and macromolecules which aid in the digestion and absorption of each other, right? So aim for whole foods if you can and supplement only when necessary. Plant stanols and sterols, they mimic cholesterol and bind to the receptors, which means cholesterol no longer can bind to those receptors and uptake into the bloodstream. So plant stanols and sterols, mega important. And so long as you're getting your veggies in whatever way you can, I would shoot for that, right? So timing, again, this is of lesser importance than the rest of the things we talked about, but timing does have a place. So we talked about meal frequency, how many meals in a day. I would use some of these strategies to establish that. The only thing I emphasize from a meal timing perspective is protein. So you should space out protein feedings evenly throughout the day, typically in a window of approximately 3 to 6 hours apart. This is due to muscle protein synthesis, right? We want to maintain muscle mass due to its positive effects on cardiovascular disease and your job performance, right? So we want to stimulate muscle protein synthesis as often as possible. So once you establish your protein, we are now going to split that amongst your meals about 3 to 6 hours apart. For those who are dieting down, I would recommend on the lower end of that. And for those who are of higher muscle mass, further to the lower end of that, because you likely, although we don't have the studies yet, you likely will need that protein in larger amounts or more often. So 0.4 grams of protein per kilo per meal is the typical suggestion. And if you are spacing your total protein intake accordingly, you should nail that. And again, for those of us who are higher muscle mass, we may need a little bit more than that, and it's no problem if you err on that side. Carbs near training or the event for performance. That is the only thing when it comes to carb timing. Outside of that, have them whenever you want. Fats I typically shuffle towards early and late in the day, simply for feelings of satiety, especially on diet, because you're gonna get hungry. So I shuffle them towards those ends of the day so that you feel like you're still full, right? All right, so the rest is preference. Optimal is not always optimal. If you do not like the spacing of your current meal intake, change it, because I'd rather you get your food in than not. So this is gonna be especially important for you guys on the job and off. Supplements, again, of least importance, but there are some we should pay attention to. Creatine, one of the most widely studied supplements we have. Very positive for performance, modest, 2%-ish improvement in your sports performance. The typical recommendations are 10 to 20 grams per day during a loading week, and then 3 to 5 grams per day for maintenance. After that, we have caffeine. So current caffeine recommendations for performance is 3 to 6 milligrams per kilo. And I would use that per person based on your tolerance with caffeine and history of use with caffeine. And for you guys especially, I would err on the side of caution and monitor that intake due to your significant risk for CVD, cardiac arrest, and the issues that many of the presenters have already highlighted. Protein supplement as needed. You don't have to, but if you can't get your food in, protein supplement. Omega-3 fish oil, if you refuse to eat fish, and if you can't get it in the form of any other food, however, I would urge you to try to. And then a multivitamin I like as a coverall, right? It's cheap, so why not? It's not gonna hurt you. And we get to my favorite part today. So in working with many of you so far, a lot of you do well with training. A lot of you do well with nutrition to the best of your ability. No one gets sleep. And interestingly enough, we have a study here showing that people who do not get adequate sleep have similar insulin resistance and increased glucose to those that have established diabetes. Problematic, right? What mechanisms could this be? Hormones, hormone disruption through lack of sleep, reduced skeletal muscle mass, and increased fat mass through lack of sleep. We'll get to that in a second. And increased caloric intake, because when you do not sleep enough, you tend to overeat. So, relative muscle mass is negatively associated with the development of type 2 diabetes. Note that. Resistance training causes molecular changes that may assist with increased glucose uptake and improving insulin sensitivity, likely due to the increased muscle mass because of that resistance training. So, lean body mass is associated with lower risk of major adverse cardiovascular events, which we talked about before, is your current leading cause of death on the force. How do we mitigate that? What does this have to do with sleep? Well, here in this study, we have a group of 8.5 hours of sleep and a group of 5.5 hours sleep, both engaging in a fat loss program. Both lost the same amount of weight. The group that got less sleep lost significantly more in muscle mass on the same diet with less sleep. The group that got sufficient sleep lost very little in lean muscle mass lost very little in lean muscle mass, and significant amount of the weight lost was fat mass. So that's going to be, again, important when referencing our cardiovascular numbers and our diabetes numbers. So, some strategies you guys use that I have currently witnessed in coaching a few of you guys. You have your 48 hours on, we'll just make up for it, right? On our days off, catch up on sleep. Well, we got a study here that compared caloric restriction for weight loss with people getting consistent sleep each night and those who restricted sleep on some nights and caught up on others. They had the same weekly total sleep. Well, 39% of the weight loss was lean body mass in the sleep restricted group, while only 17% was lean body mass in the group that got enough sleep. So it doesn't seem that we can just catch up, right? We cannot just catch up on sleep. We have to work on getting through a full sleep cycle and using strategies to manipulate our sleep in ways that we no longer are at risk for these problems that are majorly associated with a lack of sleep, right? Inadequate sleep is also associated with an increased risk for CVD, increased risk in those pro-inflammatory cytokines that we are trying to mitigate through both nutrition and program periodization. However, we're clearly seeing that if we combine both of those great strategies with a lack of sleep, we're banging our head against the wall and hoping we're going to get through, right? Lower leptin levels and increased ghrelin levels. These are hunger regulation hormones. This is why those who get a lack of sleep typically overeat. Risk of depression and anxiety, also going to impact those inflammation markers, as well as some of those risk factors for suicide. Cognitive function and memory, as well as decision making. This is going to go back to on-the-job performance. If we are not getting adequate sleep, on-the-job performance will suffer. So if you do want the link to this, all of the studies are referenced here at the end of the PowerPoint. And feel free to reach out for those references. But I would like to leave you with one more concluding statement, and that is that I have witnessed a lot of you guys making a genuine effort to improve your health by hiring coaches, hiring nutritionists, and doing everything you can, following a lot of these strategies to improve your health and your performance on the job. The one area of improvement that I cannot fix, all I can do is say, get better sleep, right? You guys cannot fix because you have to perform when you're asked to perform. So this isn't an appeal to the firefighters that are doing their job. This is an appeal to those of you in a management position, those of you that can make a schedule change, those of you that can make positive changes in the department to improve sleep. I don't have the answers because I don't know your hierarchy. I don't know your management, and I don't know how we can improve that, but I would love to talk to someone about it. I would love to reference these studies. However, I would reference some of the studies done from NASA on napping. They have probably the most groundbreaking research on sleep, and we know why. It's NASA, and they need to perform as well, right? So we should take a note out of their book. We should take a note on improving sleeping quarters, whether that may be blackout rooms, isolated rooms so that you are not interrupted during your sleep, possible implementation of some kind of napping schedule while on the job, and possibly some kind of a relief program for on-duty firefighters who have not gotten that consistent amount of sleep, because it sure does seem that while we try to do all that we can through exercise and nutrition, and I do urge that you do that because a lot of you dropped your hands right before I got to sleep anyways, I do urge someone with the power to make change at a department-wide level to improve those sleeping patterns, that sleep quality, and the general department efforts around sleep. Any questions?
What would an average day look like for one of us eating?
So eating, yes. So I do like the previous referenced split day eating plan, shuffling a little bit more calories to your day of eating, or shuffling a little bit more calories to your day of work, and shuffling a little bit less to your days off. However, that is not always conducive to someone's schedule, and I would lean towards preference mostly when establishing your daily intake of calories. Again, focus on those calories, then the macros, then the specifics. So a typical day while on the job could look like pretty hectic. In my experience with you guys, you're trying to figure out, you're trying to do as much as you can. So strategies would be bringing meals, as well as promoting a different culture around the firehouse, right? I know you guys are faced with constant choices of donuts and homemade meals and things that people bring in because that's fun and that's your guys' culture. But we should promote a little bit more acceptance of those that are trying to improve their markers through nutrition. And on those days off, nail it. Nail it as much as you can because that's going to be when you have your most time to focus on that, and really organize it according to your lifestyle at the end of the day. Sweet.